Today is Thursday, July 14th, and welcome to the 8:30 show. I'm KJ, and every Thursday night you'll find me here at 8:30 p.m. on YouTube at Metro Conservative Media. Please hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. At the same time, I'm also live on Facebook at the Metro Conservative Media Facebook page. Check out our page and join the conversation by commenting on this video. I will respond to your comments throughout the show. This is a show where I chat with various individuals about their conservative journey and just interesting topics that affect us in our community. Tonight, my guest is political consultant and constituent advocate Nathaniel Gavronsky.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, yes. How are you tonight?
I'm doing pretty good. Today is one of the few days I don't spend all my days in a Capitol building researching stuff. So I get to dress down, get to be more relaxed, just catching up on casual reading in my little den. So it's been pretty nice.
Cool. Yeah. Well, today's the day for it. I don't know how the weather is where you are, but here in
Very hot.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I won't complain because I love the summertime. So, all right. Well, as you know, you've been on the show before, and so I start out each show with a random question and answer segment so the audience can get to know you a little bit better in a fun and cool way. As you know, it's a rapid fire round of questions. So we'll get right into it.
All right.
All right. So, what are you most known for amongst your friends?
That I know too much and I don't know how to shut up.
Okay. All right. Which one would you choose? Public school system or homeschooling? If you had to choose one or the other.
Well, I believe now that we're getting to the point where homeschooling is more appropriate for most children. So this was not always my answer, but it seems to be my answer going forward.
Okay. What quality do you value most in your friends? That's a tough one.
Well, because I don't have many, because I've learned that quantity is no substitute for quality.
Right. But what's one thing you value? What quality do you value most when in your friends?
I'm probably going to have to say no filter.
Okay. All right. So
I need someone to be straight with me at all times.
Okay. I appreciate that. If you had to choose, big party or small gathering?
Oh, definitely a small party because I will have already selected those out of the big gathering that I want to spend time with, and those will be the ones that'll be invited. In fact, out of everyone I went to high school with, only one person's ever been to my house since high school.
Okay. All right. All right. Here's a good one. All right. 2024 presidential election. If it were down to Biden or Trump, not who you would vote for, but who do you think would win?
I don't think Biden has a chance to win an election. So it doesn't matter who the contestants are. If Biden is one of them, the other person would win.
Okay. And then the last is, which one would you prefer, being painfully aware or blissfully ignorant?
Well, here's a word of advice I'll leave with everyone. You don't have to see the truck for it to kill you when it hits you.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Okay. All right. That's it right there. All right. So that was just kind of like a fun question and answer kind of period. So I want to get into the nuts and bolts of our discussion, which is the Constitution. So there has been a lot of talk about the Constitution lately with the recent Supreme Court cases on abortion, gun rights, religious freedom, or some. So tonight, I want to talk to you about the foundational principles of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. So my first thing I wanted to talk to you about and get your thoughts on is what did the founders intend for morality to be part of the foundation of the Constitution?
All right, now before I go into this, for the viewers to know, I'm using very close to primary sources when I've researched this topic. My third oldest copy of a textbook and to be used to teach constitutional scholars what the Constitution's for, how it is to be applied, and what they meant, was published in 1858. So I want people to get a look at this, and this is actually my third oldest copy of anything dealing with the Constitution. And I use primary sources as much as I possibly can, not only like the text, but history and tradition, which you hear many times in Supreme Court cases, which is how the tradition and history from the text has been played out and how it's been interpreted over a period of time. So having many copies of the Constitution with its interpretations over many decades is where I'm able to come up with what I'm going to speak to tonight. Now, it comes about.
Ask you that really quick. Why is it important to know the interpretations? Why is that?
Well, because we have this is basically what we have to go on initially is the text. So when they go in a Supreme Court case, especially if you listen to the one that dealt with Second Amendment rights, they talked a lot about the text, about what is the focus that the court should see and look at and review when reviewing if a law should be overturned, if it should be changed, or if it was unconstitutional then this hasn't been challenged, and now that it's been challenged that it needs to be shot down. They have to review, initially the text. The text is the first of anything of what they meant. What does the words say? So the text, and then how has that been interpreted? Now we have two major areas in which we review the interpretation: the founding, obviously, and then also at the onset of the Civil War amendments, more specifically the 14th Amendment. So these are the two big periods in which we review not only the intent through the text, but how it is to be interpreted as we have advanced in our society in order to form that more perfect union. So
now and speaking of like that, so the intent, how did morality, or what did the founders intend morality to play in our Constitution and
morality was implied. If you look at literacy rates during this time period, the literacy rates were the most literate place on the planet in 1776 was Edinburgh, Scotland. The reason why is that they were also the most religious people in Europe. Literacy was basically so you could read the Bible. That was entirely the intent of literacy. Philosophy, everything else was second set to being able to read the Bible. It wasn't that people thought about being religious, or if they should be religious, or if there is a God. That wasn't the question. It was just how were they going to worship that God? There were atheists at the time. There were, but the weight of society had a very, very strict moral code. I mean, the fact that you could not work on a Sunday because not only because the Bible said you must rest on the seventh day, it was illegal. It was illegal under British law. And up until the 1980s in the United States, many states had laws where you could not be open on a Sunday. They were closed. This was just, and no one thought about it as being a religious thing. It was just, that's how it is. So you look and review these people, how they acted, how they behaved. Were they the most moral, ethical men and women in the world? No. But the morality, especially from scripture, was implied in everyday society, how everyday society functioned. It wasn't something that was questioned on if morality was valid because it was your God versus my God. It was just that was the moral way of doing things. That's it. It wasn't debated on, well, that's Lutheran or that's Catholic or that's Orthodox. the general crux of everything was, well, this is what morals say. That's why our legal code sounds a lot like the Ten Commandments, because that's where we started.
Okay. Now, what about the idea of natural law as the basis for our Declaration of the Independence, not ecclesiastical law? So, and not all of our founding fathers believed and were religious. What are your thoughts there?
Well, again, there were certain the weight of the religious amount of society seeped into basically everything. So even if you weren't, you know, what do they call a Bible thumper? I think is what the term atheists like to use. There was still a set of moral guidelines that basically everyone followed, and didn't question that they were religious in nature. This was just how people of a civilization were supposed to behave and manage themselves. In fact, philosophers of this time period coming into the Enlightenment were trying to escape, the religious structure of daily life and coded law, were speaking about how basically instead of using God as reward or punishment, that the good of an intrinsic value of this behavior was why you should behave this way, not because you see a reward, but because it was the just way. I mean, in quotation marks, the just way of behaving. So they basically we're just trying to find a way to incorporate the moral codes of religious society into an atheist society, just because that was the way things worked. And you look at Locke, Milton, a lot of these guys, that's what they were talking about in their philosophies was this is the faith, and then this is the people with non-faith, but the same moral code exists because it is the intrinsic good of what you're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Now,
I mean,
what about religious freedom? Because while it seems important, didn't even make it to the list of grievances in the Declaration of Independence. So, what are your thoughts there?
well, because it wasn't necessarily like the king or the Parliament of England was saying, we are not going to allow you to worship in the specific temples and churches that you have. We're not going to let you worship on a Sunday. We're not allowing you to go to church on Wednesday nights. We're not going to allow the Jews to go on Saturday instead of Sunday. It wasn't the issue. All right. Now, if you want to see evidence of this modern times, look at France. In France, the people, the one generation before us, like our parents' generation in France, they're still bickering about class warfare. But our generation and younger, their their identity is religion, Muslim, Jewish, Christianity. To their parents, it's all class. It's all about class structure and oppression. But to the younger ones, it's religion because that's what's being targeted. French law was very targeting to saying no religious uh, behavior, no religious ornaments, no religious symbols outside the home. And so all that did was make people feverish about, like, I want to wear my yarmulke, I want to wear my cross, I want to wear my crescent moon, I'm going to wear my hijab, because that's, you're attacking that part of me, so that's going to become the most important part of me. So when you go to the Declaration of Independence, they weren't attacking their religious beliefs. The king and a majority of the colonists had the same religious dogma. It was about the king needing to refund his coffers so he could continue, the wars in Europe and put in and pushing up back against the French. So there wasn't being attacked. Religion wasn't a question about what the laws were being passed. The tax stamp, the tea, that none of that had anything to do with anyone's religion. It was, the principle of it. In fact, the tea that they dumped in Boston Harbor, including the tax levy on it, was still cheaper than the American sourced tea. But it was the principle of it. The colonists didn't get to vote on what tea and how much tax was going to be levied, is what they threw a fit over.
Now, I want to get to today because it seems like we are so, as a country, fragmented when you talk about morality. It doesn't seem as though we all have a basis or all on one accord of the basis of a moral framework. How do we how do we navigate that when you look at the Constitution?
Well, that's the problem. See, the Constitution works because we have a political term called cross-cutting cleavages. Now, what that means is you have all these diagrams. Okay, imagine these big diagrams, and you fit in this one, you fit in this one, but you didn't. You might not fit this one that well. But there was another one in the middle between both of those that you fit into the two of those together with this thing in the middle. So you guys both had something else in common, even if you're far apart over here. Something in the middle you had something in common with. Now something else circled over here that also kept you guys in common together on a lot of issues, even if you weren't together on other issues. And then again, another big circle, and another big circle. Where those circles intersect, it's called a cleavage. That's the political science term for it. When you're putting together the Constitution, there were many, many cross-cutting cleavages that allowed both North and Southern states who did have a very distinguished and different culture to agree on many things. I mean, the Virginia, New Jersey plan. I mean, the Virginia plan won out because it enough Northerners saw the value in it that, hey, that would actually work for me too. They went with it. What's going on? Remember, I talked about France, how the younger people in France are more identifying with the religion versus their class, their economic status in France. You look at what the left has been doing in the United States, they make a specific component of your identity the most important aspect of your entire world. Now, it's very hard to have anything in common if you are only able and only allowed to look at one specific thing of the entirety of who you are and making that the single most important thing. You're never going to have anything in common unless you dot all the check marks. I am a transgender, non-binary person of color from a broken home who stands in prison for a trumped-up drug charge, I also live in an urban area. I mean, you check all these boxes, right? And that's the problem, but that also creates cannibalism within that own political system. You've seen that cancel culture comes for the Democrats more than it comes for, within themselves, more so than it does from Republicans to other Republicans. It's because that box checking. A bunch of my friends at NYU and I were discussing this one night, that if you have a room full of Trump supporters, right. That you start talking about things and you're going to find out that there's a lot of things you don't see eye to eye on. In fact, not every Trump supporter is pro-life. So a lot of them do have some pro-choice tendencies, like rape, incest, life of the mother, which I think most people are along those lines. But when it gets down to the 6-week, 18-week, 24-week limits, there's some variations on where people stand on that and are also Trump supporters. The thing is that once you break down the other conservatives where they're not all on the same page, when they all walk out of the room, they're still all conservatives. They all consider everyone else in that room to be conservatives. The Democrats, on the other hand, you put them all in a room and they can't all check every single box. That person's not one of us. They're not one of us. Throw them out. They're not allowed to be in our club. That's them. They are the other. We don't support them because they don't support everything the way they're not a vegetarian. They're not a vegan. They don't believe in hyperfeminism. They don't believe that abortion should be on demand to the day of birth. They don't. I mean, you get to that point to where they don't fit the club anymore. Mm-hmm. With the left, there is no cross-cutting cleavages. You have to hit every single box or you don't exist. And with the morality part of it, morals are a common code of a collective. Okay, the moral laws of the United States and India are very different. We're both, basically remnants of the British Empire. We have very distinct cultures, we're both democracies. We both primarily speak English. We're not the same. We have very, very different moral hierarchies on how things are done, because that's just how morals work. It's just that through the Christian Western world, the Judeo-Christian world, which includes a lot of Islam, by the way, because they're all Abrahamic religions, the code of morality is, even though it's not completely uniform, there's a lot of common ground that a lot of them see each other, as brethren in it. When you remove that part of the identity, I mean, it's a small part of most people's identity, a large part for some other people's identity. But if you completely remove it altogether, there's very hard to find any background to fill in your group because you're removing everything you have in common with everybody. They're not LGBTQ plus. They're not, but they're not non-binary. They're not vegan. So they don't understand what I feel. They don't understand me because they're not a vegan. They don't understand me because they're not LGBTQ plus. They don't understand me because they're not a person of color. There are people that are oppressed, literally oppressed from birth, and they are white as Wonder Bread. All right, they are. People born with disabilities. They are more oppressed than you could possibly realize because no opportunity is afforded them because their behavior doesn't allow them to fit into a larger group at a workplace or at a school system or in any type of group activities. They don't fit in. So yeah, they're ostracized. Well, we don't want you around, man. You get out of here. We don't want to play with you. We don't because you're not like one of us.
Yeah, we were last night we had a discussion on one of our shows with just the guys. You should join one week. Where we have just the guys come on and just talk about different topics. And last night they were talking about racism, and we had a gentleman on who's progressive, and he said that Black people can't be racist. He said it's actually defined. It's in the dictionary now. And so it was a lot of back and forth. Everybody was like, "What are you talking about? Anybody can be racist." But he was hard bent against it.
That's why I have all these older books. I'm like, racist according to what year? Because, and this is where interpretation comes in. So you asked about interpretation. When you start changing the meaning of what good is, you completely reshape how things ought to be. If the intrinsic good is now not a concept but a variable, then you have no foundation for where you can stand or come to any agreement at all. Everything is always against you. But this is their design. I think people realize that's the design of this, by making it to where only a Black, blue-collared, first-generation immigrant knows how a Black, blue-collar worker, first-generation immigrant feels. That no one else could possibly understand how they feel. We know that's not true.
Right.
A lot of people who work at that factory, at that blue-collar place, probably have the same conditions and problems. Now, does the Black person have some other things that the white person doesn't experience? Oh, yeah, they do. And I mean, in fact, this is something that I actually tell my non-people of color to go try to ask someone a person of color, go try to return something at a store without a receipt. I dare you. There are situations where your skin color comes into play.
Right.
That's one of them. And that's something that a person who is not a person of color probably doesn't experience.
Right.
There is racism, but it's not institutionalized racism, as if the government and all the people within the society have stated that we are not going to allow people that have 2 shades darker complexion than this allowed to be believed about anything. We are always going to call in to question every single motive that they have. That's not what it is.
Right.
Racism is experience. It's basically, you have a category, you break down a category. You don't have an experience with a lot of people in a certain group. You can only go off of what you've learned and what you've experienced in the small amount of inter dialogue you've had with them. Most racism from both races, from both sides, comes from never interacting with each other and only going off what you see on TV and in rap videos or in country songs, using really generic genres. But no, not every white boy drives a Ford, all bucked up and wears a cowboy hat. And not every black person wears a do-rag and drives a Monte Carlo eating watermelon and fried chicken.
Right.
These are just stupid categorization that you have never had an experience with counters it as. So it comes off as being ignorant, and then the other side becomes defensive. Like, man, what do you think I do? We're drinking grape. I'm gonna go outside and drink my grape drink. Like, no, don't even be doing it. You know what I mean? I'm drinking my watermelon juice. It's just that you get people become defensive on it really quickly.
Well, let me ask you. I want to move back to something you said about precedent and about what you had all those books behind you and the Constitution. I want to move to this decision, this Dobbs v. Jackson decision. So as we know, Alito stated the Constitution makes no reference to abortion and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision. He says it's time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. So how can we look at this in the context of precedents when in Roe it was kind of they found something different, but here he's saying there is no constitutional right to abortion?
Well, because he's speaking about the federal Constitution. Okay, so like this, and this is where I really encourage people to read. Go find old versions if you need be. But for example, the person who wrote the Bill of Rights didn't like them. He was actually he was an anti-federalist. His problem was that if you enumerate some, you eliminate the others. So by enumerating,
you have the name?
Really, Madison?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure you. Okay, yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, James Madison.
Okay.
James Madison was because they wrote the Constitution, right? They sent it out to all the states. And they looked at it and like, we got some questions here. Because they had just gotten rid of the British Crown. The Articles of Confederation left the central government very, very weak. The new central government didn't explicitly say, oh, by the way, we can put troops in your house when we feel like it. We can tell you what you can and cannot say. We can prevent you from speaking. We're going to dictate a religion. The Constitution didn't say any of that, did it? The Constitution never said that we can knock down your door and search your personal papers and belongings without your consent and without probable cause. The Constitution doesn't. It doesn't say that we can make you tell us everything that you did wrong so we can lock you up for the rest of your life. The Constitution doesn't say any of it. The fact that it doesn't say it meant that they didn't have the right to do that. But the states looked at it like, yeah, you might not say that now, but 20 years from now, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, what's going to prevent you from saying that, oh, we by the Senate and the House and the presidency have all decided that we are going to tell people what they can and cannot say online and in print and in public. There really wouldn't have been much to prevent that from happening. Second Amendment, the same way. So whatever the Constitution, so this comes down to the most primarily the 10th Amendment, which is the rights that are not explicitly left to the federal government in this text are left to the states to decide. Abortion is not mentioned as a primary right in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, nor any amendment of the Constitution that the amendments that we have in there. So it should have gone to the states. And that's Alito's comment, is that there is nothing in the Constitution that says that it's permissible or illegal Therefore, it should be left to the states to decide, because the states already had laws on the books in the 1970s that dictated what and where and how an abortion was illegal, if it was illegal, if it was legal at all. In some states, it wasn't illegal. It wasn't legal at all. Don't forget, this case was heard twice. So in between the two hearings, they had another case that came in between. And when Blackburn, he was the Supreme Court justice during Roe v. Wade. Before he was a Supreme Court justice, he was the legal counsel for the Mayo Clinic up in Minnesota. So after the first hearing, and it was evident they were going to have to listen to it again, he went to the Mayo Clinic and he researched and he researched and researched. He's not a doctor. He has some background in medical stuff because he was representing a medical entity. But it came down to his research on at what point does the state have the right to protect the life of the unborn child. This goes back to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Murder, you can't murder people. So what point, does the state have a duty to say, this is now a human being?
Right.
It has the rights thereof every other U.S. citizen. Viability in the early 70s was 24 weeks. That was the mode of our science at the time. At 24 weeks, the baby could be removed from the womb and survive on its own.
Mm-hmm.
It would need some help because a baby born at 9 months, it can't cook up its own eggs.
Right.
But 24 weeks to 9th month full term, that baby can survive with the same amount of care given at 9 months as it is 24 weeks. So the whole trimester thing came in there. So like the first trimester, it's not viable. The woman has every right to say, I don't want to carry this to term. And within that first trimester could legally have an abortion. The second trimester, it came into the position like mother's health, other qualifiers to where a woman could get an abortion. But once you hit 24 weeks in all 50 states under Roe v. Wade, abortion, the state had the ability and the moral code to say you can't seek an abortion after 24 weeks. That's Roe v. Wade. In Casey in 1992, which was actually a bill that came out of Pennsylvania from a Democratic governor, mind you. He was Governor Casey he's Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. Their state legislature challenged it, saying, we think that there should be other limits on abortion, which most people in the country believe that there should be limits on abortion. That same group of people also believe that there should be times when a woman can seek out an abortion. We as a nation really haven't moved very far from that point since the 70s. But Casey, that law in 92 took away the trimester part. Mm-hmm. It kept viability. So it came down to viability in Casey in 1992, which was up to 24 weeks. That was the case. 24 weeks, that's the baby's viable. Up until then, you can have an abortion. Past that, the state has a moral obligation to protect the life of the unborn child. That's Roe and Casey.
Right.
So when you get to the new challenge, now if you actually go through and read the arguments, which if you really are really bored on a Saturday night and just don't want an excuse to go out, read them. Read the arguments that they at both sides read. So instead of saying that, hey, the petitioner is saying that, hey, we believe that our modern science has permitted viability to go from 24 weeks to 18 weeks, which is what the law said. They moved from down to 18 weeks, not 6 weeks, 18 weeks. Well, I think it was like 15, 18 weeks, something like that. I got to look at the numbers exactly. But it moved to a shorter period of time on which the woman could decide she wanted an abortion. That was what they said. But that's not what they argued. They argued that it wasn't the federal government's position to tell a state when or where they could determine when viability was and when and where an abortion may or may not take place.
And what is
Because
viability? Can you just explain that to?
what do you mean?
What
Viability. Okay, viability. So there's a massive car accident. The mother's life is lost. She's not going to make it. You get there immediately. You do an emergency C-section. You pull the child out. The baby will survive.
Mm.
Versus same situation. You try to take the baby out of the mother because the mother has been killed. The baby doesn't have the ability to make it on its own. That's viability.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our modern science has advanced since 73 to where we are able to get babies born, I think 13 weeks, 12 weeks
right.
into development, and they can survive. Even if just general premature stress induced labor, children are born that are just out of the first trimester at times, first and second trimester. 73, that wouldn't have been possible. We didn't have the ability to see that child live.
But regardless of all of that, the Constitution never addresses any of this.
Exactly. So that's why anything that's not addressed in the Constitution is referred back to the states. That's what the argument was in this case. So instead of arguing, well, viability should be lowered because modern medical ability allows us to make children at 15 weeks viable. That wasn't what they argued. They straight up argued Constitution does not say anywhere in the text of the Constitution does not mention that abortion is permissible.
Now, let me ask you something about that, because since you mentioned the Constitution, the text of the Constitution, because likewise, the Confederate States wanted the issue of slavery to be returned to the states also. So what are your thoughts there? Where is this kind of the same thinking or along the same lines where slavery?
It is, but slaves, and this is the most shameful part of American history, is that blacks were just the pawns of political brokering. It wasn't about slavery. It really wasn't. They weren't going to actually have slaves. They just wanted the ability to call themselves a slave state because they wanted power in the Senate. Now, power in the Senate allowed you to do a lot of things that didn't really involve slavery. It involved economics. It involved tariffs. It involved printing of money. It involved so much more than just.
Why would you want to be called a slave state? What did that get you?
Because, okay, so even after the Civil War, states came in pairs. Look, the reason why we have North and South Dakota was because in 1889, you had Oregon and Washington both ready to come in, and they were going to come in as Republican states. They didn't have enough Democrat states to come in, so they heaved the Dakota into two. So they had two Democrat, two Republican states come in at a time. Why do we have a 50-50 split in the U.S. Senate right now? They only bring them in twos. Why? The Senate. The Missouri Compromise prevented slavery from expanding further west and north of Missouri. Stephen Douglas of Illinois, a Democrat, wrote the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act overturned the Missouri Compromise, allowing slave states or free states to wander wherever they wanted to go. If the Northwest wanted to have slavery, they could. If Nevada, which wasn't even thoughts of at the time, wanted to have slavery, they could. If the Dakotas wanted slavery, they could. If Minnesota, Wisconsin, any of them could have had slavery. That would have basically was just giving back the balance, the ability to have a balance in the Senate, because they weren't going to have it. The Democrats were going to lose their majority very quickly. As soon as those more states came in. This Kansas-Nebraska Act ended that, permitting, again, slave states to move north and west of Missouri to preserve that balance in the Senate. Blacks were just pawns. That's the saddest truth I can give you on U.S. history, is that the blacks were pawns for the power brokering in the U.S. Senate. And I honestly think the U.S. Senate should have to physically apologize in writing to each and every single person that can track their ancestry to the time of slavery, because you weren't necessarily property, because you were, but you were a pawn to someone else's power grab. That is the most disgusting part of U.S. history that no one actually discusses, because we still do it. We still only bring states in pairs. The last two, Alaska and Hawaii, couldn't come in until they were both ready. One Republican, one as a Democrat.
So how is that disgusting? Because they still come in as pairs.
Because they manage it just so that they can keep the party power structure.
Oh, I see.
They don't, it's literally, they don't care so much about the issues. It's just who has a chance of pulling in power. Here's the thing. They think by making Puerto Rico a state, they would automatically get 2 Democratic senators. Puerto Rico is actually pretty religious. I don't know if they would necessarily get 2 Democratic senators. They'd probably split. They won't let D.C. become a state. Well, one, it's constitutionally not allowed. But D.C. it would just be basically one big city state. Urban areas predominantly pick Democrats. So the Republicans won't let them in there. They won't allow California to split, which it has wanted to for a while, because the parts of California that would split would all have Republican senators. Oregon, Washington, all of which their local state legislators have discussed splitting up. The new parts, the new states would vote Republican. This is the same power structure dating back to prior to the Civil War.
I see. I see.
No one thinks about it, but that's the reality of it. At the time, it was about we could actually expand slavery, have more slaves, move more slaves, and that really wasn't their thought process. Their thought process was we need to be able to keep our balance in the Senate, and it was the Democrats that did it. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was authored by Stephen Douglas out of Illinois. That very act is what brought Lincoln out of retirement.
All right. Well, I did want to mention one thing about this recent decision that was handed down. And basically, the court did not declare a right to life to unborn children under the 14th Amendment. And so, for all the wailing and hollering that Democrats have done, that was something that they didn't address.
You're the only person to address that so far.
Oh, so I mean, what are your thoughts there?
This is where the pro-choice people should be screaming and hollering, we got what we wanted. Right. Why? Because in New York, Colorado, California, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, and any other state that they have the majority in the legislature and in the governor's mansion, they can make abortion on demand like that. That means, hey, my water broke. I'm having a second thoughts. Let's drill its head off. They could legally pass that law in New York.
Oh, okay.
They could pass a law in New York that says, yeah, water broke. I'm having second thoughts. Let's go drain this kid's head out before it actually comes out and breathes on its own for the first time. And that could become legal. In California, that could become legal. Colorado, it could become legal.
Yeah, and now we're seeing this abortion debate, or the issue is actually, it sounds like it's being used like the slavery issue was being used many decades ago. They're using unborn babies to kind of as pawns, just like they were using slaves.
Yeah. So, because they don't really care about the issue, they just care about the power.
Right.
And that's really the part that pisses me off the most about American politics, especially on the Democratic side. The Democrats are the ones that are using slaves as pawns, and now they're using access to abortion as pawns. Most states have provisions where abortion is legal on necessity of the life of the mother, rape, incest, mean, the things where most people are in agreement on. And that goes up into viability for the baby, but since the mother's body can't handle it, so they will try to do a live birth. So the baby has a shot. But if something is so wrong that the baby's not going to make it, the mother's not going to make it unless the baby gets terminated. And it's just not likely the baby's going to make it, even if they get it out. That's protected. That I think maybe only a few states had it to where under no circumstances, but those state Supreme Courts have yet to hear a case on that, and that won't hold. If the life of the mother is at risk, I don't see any state going to be able to hold down a law that says no abortion allowed under any circumstances. But I'm also afraid that you're going to see that abortion is allowed on demand for any reason at any time. And that's what I think the right missed on this reversal, because it just went back to, it's not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, because this is what the argument was.
So you believe that the Constitution, that this should be applicable, the 14th Amendment should be applicable, and that
I think there's going to have to be another case. Because the argument that was made didn't mention the right to life. It just mentioned the states had the jurisdiction over abortion because it wasn't explicitly mentioned in the U.S. Constitution.
Okay. But if it's not mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, then how can the 14th Amendment apply?
The 14th Amendment, you would have to make that argument in court. They didn't make it.
I see. Okay.
So someone in New York or Colorado or California is going to have to wait until someone in the 9th month, a day before the due date, decides to suck the brains out of the child because they had second thoughts and just didn't want to go through with it. At that point, you would have to go through the state court. The state court would have to say, hey, abortion is legal at any time in this state. You would have to make your argument, well, the 14th Amendment states that you have, these certain, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, that we codified it. No matter where you were born, if you're a human, these are yours. And that's then going to argue the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court could then say, under this brief, the way this has been argued, that at a certain point, it's a human life. But you have to make that part of your argument. And this Dobbs case wasn't.
Right.
Dobbs, the Dobbs case, they could have just done it all together by saying, really, Europe, it's 15 weeks. The only countries that really have it at on demand is North Korea and China. But the rest of the world's consensus is about 15 weeks. We're at 24 weeks. We believe that viability has come at a much younger period because of modern scientific advancements. But they argue they went states' rights. Now, this also.
Do you think most of the Democrat Party really advocate for abortion on demand?
The activists are. A lot of Democrat voters, no, but the loud voices on MSNBC, CNN, and The View, high-level left-leaning governors like Newsom, Hochul, which in Michigan, can't stand her. They are basically saying, until it takes its first breath.
Woo! Yeah. Well, we are at the end of our time. I do want to ask you about the Second Amendment. Do you think that, we are going to see some push against the Second Amendment and some.
Oh, here's the problem with Second Amendment is that these states, okay, so the law in New York was passed in 1911. It was passed because a lot of free blacks were moving into New York State, and we can't have them having guns now, can we? Oh, sure, ain't no Bob. Nope, ain't doing it. That law was to make so that unless you really knew who and what and who did what, the proper people, you couldn't get a permit. That's the reason it was passed. What the argument was in that, and I've also read that one, was the idea of offensive and being offensive as an individual. Again, the text and the history and tradition, because there have been times where the way you carried a gun was limited. You could either there was never been a jurisdiction in the history and tradition of the country as a whole that you couldn't carry either concealed or open, but they would limit it to only concealed or only open.
Mm-hmm.
There were laws in Tennessee that you couldn't carry a gun in a manner so to terrify the civilians and the goer-bys of town. So you couldn't walk around with a Kentucky rifle saying, "I'm gonna shoot all your chickens. I'm gonna shoot all your hogs. I am going to shoot all the livestock. I'm going to take your children." You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that now. You couldn't do that before the founding of the country. That was just you big. Hey, he's either had too much alcohol, not enough alcohol, but he doesn't need that weapon on him. Mm-hmm. So if you're acting in an offensive and terrorizing manner, the government could remove your gun.
Right.
This is where red flag laws are basically have legitimacy at the federal level and state level, is if you are acting in a way that is terrifying and menacing to the greater society around you. Yeah, they can take your gun away because you're not acting in a moral manner to handle a firearm. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be in a militia to have a gun. Right. You're able to have a militia because everyone already had the guns.
Right.
That's the text. Is that in order to have a well-regulated militia, to have this, so this is possible. The militia, you have to have the right to have and bear arms. So you have to have the right to hold and bear arms so that you could actually have a militia when need be.
Right.
The militia wasn't the reason.
For that in Ukraine.
$40 billion to Ukraine, but no money for American babies and mothers. Mm-hmm. Listen, here's the thing I'm going to tell you about Ukraine. And I want everyone I don't care what side you're on. I don't care if you like Putin. I don't care if you like Zelensky. I don't care if you're Jewish, Muslim, Christian. I don't care where you're from. Here's something you need to know about the current Ukrainian government. The largest area that Jews were murdered outside of Nazi-controlled territory was in Kiev. There's a little plaque on the side of the road. As Babi Yari. That was the place where they were all brought in to center town by their neighbors and tortured and killed. That plaque has been there since the end of World War II. In 1991, when the Soviet Union broke apart, Ukraine became an independent nation, that monument stayed. When the coup took place in 2014, the new government took over. The road that leads to that monument was renamed to Stefan Bandera Way. Now, anyone who likes and watched Daniel Craig's movies, I recommend you watch a movie called Defiance. Beginning of the movie, Daniel Craig's family is being chased at and targeted down by fascists. The thing is that they're all speaking the same language, Ukrainian. The Ukrainians slaughtered more Jews than the Germans could get their hands on in the Soviet Union. Stefan Bandera was the fascist leader in Ukraine who sided with Hitler to murder the Jews of Ukraine. That's what the government in Ukraine in 2014 did. They renamed the road to that massacre spot Stefan Bandera Way because they wanted to stick it to the Jews one more time. I don't care that Zelensky is Jewish. He's Jewish culturally. He probably wouldn't be able to tell you anything about Jewish culture. Listen, I've met the man. He doesn't know much about Judaism. He ran on the platform that if you elect me, I will end the problem in the Donbass. The Donbass was a problem before he got elected. The very first thing he was told when he became elected, you get in our way, we will kill you. Since 2014 until 2022, over 14,000 civilians, women and children, were shot and killed in the Donbass by Ukrainian forces. The Azov army gets its name dating back to World War II with the Ukrainian regiments that fought for Hitler. There have not been 14,000 casualties since February 23rd of 2022. In Odessa in 2014, there were a lot of ethnic Russians who were citizens of Ukraine, carried Ukrainian passports, that were locked in a building and had the building set on fire while they were alive.
Well, why is the United States supporting Ukraine's then? If this is
because Lindsey Graham and John McCain were living in World War II and post-World War II and still see Russia as the enemy. Russia, and I dare anyone on this program, anyone who ever watches this, go through every instance of Russian history since the year 880, through the time that Kiev was burnt down in 1240 by the Mongol invasion, to the Pasha taking the throne from Poland, and to the liberation of Finland from Sweden in the Great Northern War, from Napoleon to Hitler to Stalin to Putin. Find me one treaty the Russians have ever broken. There's none. Every treaty Stalin had with Churchill, he kept. All the treaties that Lenin had, all the treaties that the Tsars had, they kept all of them. Every single one. Including the treaty in the early 90s where the Russians were forced by the United States to protect ethnic minorities in any and all of the former Soviet republics. There's 15 of them. That's why in 2008, when Saakashvili, I call him Saakashvili, in Georgia, started launching shells into two breakaway provinces of Georgia, South Ossetia and Akhaban. Russia was duty bound by that early 90s treaty to go in to prevent ethnic minorities who weren't Russian or Georgian from being slaughtered. And if you watch Tucker Carlson's episode from shortly after that war started, he talks to two minority girls that are living in the Republic of Georgia that thank Putin for preventing them from being slaughtered.
So what are you saying? You're saying that Putin is the good guy?
Fuck no. Putin ain't no good guy. But what I am saying is that the United States isn't the good guy either.
Right.
Okay. Zelensky, since Biden has taken control and taken office, has outlawed every opposition party, outlawed all TV stations except for what he directly has control over. Hitler did that. Stalin didn't. Hitler did. During the war, Stalin actually liberalized and opened up churches. And even though it was very, very dangerous, it was very common to be able to find non-revolutionary pro-communist literature and propaganda in the Soviet Union. It was just not smart to have a lot of it. After Stalin died, it was just a running joke.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the thing. Here's the major differences between the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union had a much cooler sounding anthem. The United States had a much more colorful flag. The Soviets knew that shit propaganda they were being fed every morning was BS. The Americans ate it for breakfast. When it comes to Russia, I hate to tell a lot of people, but you don't know what you're talking about. Is Putin a nice guy? No. But does Putin have a reason to be threatened? They have one aircraft carrier. One. You want what an aircraft carrier is used for? Offense. The entirety of Russia's army is designed for defense. The entirety of it. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization from 1949 was designed to be a defensive pact. The two times that it has acted prior to 9/11 were in offense. NATO, without being attacked or provoked, decided they were just going to bomb and determine who was in control of the Yugoslavia. Wasn't there a fight? They weren't attacked. No NATO nation was being attacked. But the French and the Americans, the British, like, you know what? We want to see what happens here. We're going to bomb. That's not a defensive alliance, is it? Defensive alliance doesn't pull the trigger first. NATO does. NATO has had an agreement since 1989-90 with the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation, which is the successor state to the Soviet Union, that NATO would not expand any further eastward. And that was the agreement if they would allow East Germany and West Germany to unite and all become one nation under NATO, that Austria would never become a NATO member. Austria is not a NATO member, is it? Finland and Sweden had their own agreements that we don't really care what you do, but you can't allow the U.S. to attack Soviet Union or now Russia using Swedish or Finnish airspace. We'll see what happens with NATO and the expansion of NATO into Finland and Sweden. But I can tell you this. Do you think the United States for a second would allow someone to come into Pennsylvania, cut Philadelphia off, and then have everyone in Philadelphia tell everyone else that we were never part of the United States? The United States has oppressed us and occupied us since 1777. What would Washington say?
They wouldn't go for it.
Exactly. Kiev, the presidential flag that has a two-headed eagle on it, that comes from Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Orthodox culture comes in to Russia via Kiev, via Prince Vladimir, who married the last daughter, the last princess of the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire, and brought her to Kiev. The remnants of the Roman Empire dated back to Augustus, died in Moscow with Ivan the Terrible.
I definitely got to have you back on to discuss this, because this could be a whole nother conversation. But definitely, that's what I was talking about. I said, because they were in Ukraine, they were arming the
CIA has been in Ukraine since 1943.
Oh.
Wasn't quite the CIA yet, but they were there. OSS was there. They were working with Stefan Bandera and his deputies to try to cause problems in the Soviet Union via Ukrainian ultranationalism. I've spent time there. I know these people. They see someone who's black or Jewish or just not ethnically Ukrainian, they wouldn't think twice to kill you if they could get away with it. Why do you think all the black people, students, were being told, oh, thank you for driving your car all the way to the border. We're going to take your car now. Go get in the back of the line. We're going to let you ethnic Ukrainians use it.
Yeah, I read that.
It happened with every single person of color in Ukraine. You're not human enough to be able to escape.
Well, why were they even there? That's what I didn't understand.
Ukraine does have a lot of international schools and scholars. It's really cheap to go to school in Ukraine. Most Ukrainians speak English. Their institutions are taught in English, Ukrainian, but they're not allowed to be taught in Russian. Ukraine tried to make Russian an illegal language when 1 in 3 Ukrainians speak Russian as a first language. In fact, I have friends that are professors in Ukraine. They give special permission to their students. They can go ahead and write their answers in Russian. They will properly grade them, but then they would have to later hand in their information in Ukrainian, but after it was all done with. Ukraine the frontier. Kiev wasn't even a Ukrainian city in the year 1645. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had murdered and slaughtered and removed all of the Ukrainian territory, with the exception of enough land about the size of Rhode Island. They then went to Russia and saying, we're being slaughtered. The Austrians think that we are worth less than deer and elk. They use this as target practice because they don't want to ruin the pelts on their furs. Please prevent us from being slaughtered. So the Russians did. A quarter of all of current Ukrainian territory was given back to the Ukrainians from the Russian Tsardom after the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was defeated. They made movies about it, actually. The Crimea wasn't given back to Ukraine until 1955 by, Khrushchev. The Donbass was given to Ukraine by Lenin in 1921. The entirety of Western Ukraine, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, all of it was given to Ukraine by Stalin in 1945.
It's all so complex. It really
Not
is.
really.
And
Not really. It's not really complex. It's just that most people, because it's not reasonable for you to know any of this stuff, it's just not common knowledge. Ukraine is not a real country. It was manufactured. The name is Russian. The frontier. The Ukrainian language they speak was what was spoken by all of Russia until like 1917. Lenin didn't like dialect, so he went to a different script, different alphabet. He removed a bunch of it, and the language distinctively changed.
So let me ask you this, because I do have to end, but the last question I have is, so why is the U.S., the Biden administration, and so hell-bent on supporting Ukraine?
The same reason why George Bush created Kosovo: control.
So what does Ukraine have? What control is it that we need from Ukraine?
Because the American government wants to tell Putin to go fuck himself.
Oh, yeah.
The idea is to break up Russia into further components. Russia is made up of 89 republics and oblasts, several of which are autonomous, meaning they rule themselves. Moscow has no control. Russia is 11 time zones long. Why the sun might have never set on the British Empire, those people never consider themselves British. The sun never sets on Russia, and they all consider themselves Russian. 150 languages are official in Russia. You can get documents in any of those 150 languages, including Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, Kazakh, Belarusian.
Wow. All right. Well, that does it for today's show. We've run out of time. You're always a wealth of knowledge. Where can people connect with you, Nathaniel?
Well, I have a Twitter handle at Nate Gavronsky. You can find me there. I have Instagram. It's Nathaniel Gavronsky, and then my Facebook page, Nathaniel Gavronsky. I post some political stuff on there, but I also do a lot of really cool reels with a lot of farm animals and Capitol buildings. Sometimes the farm animals in the Capitol buildings. It's just kind of a variety of things. I try to keep things a variety of stuff, like some heavy, some light stuff. I go to Twitter. I go to wars on Twitter for Congressman Don Bacon out of Nebraska quite often. I got into a Twitter war with Superman once over the Iowa gubernatorial race in 2018. That was fun. So I'm there to have fun. Like, I don't take it seriously, but I will definitely take you to the mat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me tonight. That does wrap up this episode of the 8:30 show. We are all over social media under Metro Conservative Media. Like, share, and leave a comment, and follow us on our Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, check us out on our webpage at www.metroconservativemedia.com. We love to get your feedback. I hope to connect with you again next Thursday at the same time. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.